Sadiq Khan has once again denied the police the resources they need to properly tackle, to properly deal with grooming gangs. This is part of a campaign, a conspiracy, as far as I'm concerned, to ensure that grooming gangs, Pakistani men who behave in this way, are never caught in London. It is something that I think all of us need to be concerned about, because Sadiq Khan is heading closer and closer and closer to the premiership of the United Kingdom. If Keir Starmer continues to the end of this term, not that likely, but Sadiq Khan may well become a member of parliament, and we know that he can be incredibly, incredibly effective, because the way that he got Ed Miliband elected as Labour leader, and incredibly dangerous, see the way that he has protected grooming gangs. What I'm going to say to you in this video is rather different to anything that you've ever heard before. I'm going to go through the reasons why I believe that there, first of all, should be prosecutions of people like Sadiq Khan and Peter Farhay for being members of grooming gangs. No, not directly, but it's by something called joint enterprise. This idea that if you are supporting somebody who is committing a very serious crime, you can be held just as responsible as them. And also, I'm going to talk about a new criminal offence that I believe it's vital that whoever is the next Prime Minister, whether that be Nigel Farage, whether that be Nick Tanconi, whether that be anybody who is on the right of British politics, and I hope it is certainly one of them, whichever one of those people come in, there needs to be a new criminal offence. I'm going to also go through the case against Sadiq Khan, because I don't want people to watch this video and say, oh, it's just because he is of Pakistani descent, it's just because he's a Muslim that you're saying all of this. There is credible evidence that Sadiq Khan is protecting grooming gangs, whether that be for political reasons or whatever reason. Nonetheless, there is a credible case. I'm going to make that case, and I'm going to suggest some solutions. Hello everyone, this video is paid for by the Patriot Fund. Details of how to donate to patriotic causes is below. Please do send us a couple of quid. If you can't, don't worry about it, but we are able to do a huge amount with the small amount of the small donations that you send to us. It's quite small amounts as well, actually. Big bang, small efforts by you. Okay, so first of all, what is going on here? Well, first of all, Sadiq Khan has avoided public questions about grooming gangs. That is to say that when he was asked at London Assembly, are you somebody, what are you doing about grooming gangs? He has consistently refused to comment. He basically says, what do you mean grooming gangs? What are they? Now, I'm going to be very specific. I am not one of these people who will use graphic terms to describe what's taken place. We don't do that when it comes to school shootings. We don't do that when it comes to murders and whatever. We have nice euphemistic terms that we use. That is not me undermining or denigrating the suffering of the young people. It's just because I'm on talk radio, and people phone in all the time, by the way, to complain about this, but I'm on talk radio, and the terminology that I use has to reflect the terminology that's used on the breakfast show. And obviously, I think the children of this country have been through enough with grooming gangs without them having to listen to the graphic details while they have their cornflakes in the morning. So when I use the term grooming gangs, it is not because I don't understand what has taken place or seek to belittle those victims. But in the case of Sadiq Khan, it's very, very clear that he is. Now, I'm going to say specifically, there is increasing evidence that the issue here is that there is a specific offence that is perpetrated by Pakistani Muslim immigrants. That is it. Now, at the same time as, more knife crime takes place amongst the black community, more burglary takes place amongst the white community, and of course more of the grooming gangs are Pakistan. Well, they're all Pakistanis in reality. There's just one or two of their mates who are also involved. Now, police forces up and down the country, social services up and down the country have been brilliant at disguising what has taken place. And that, I believe, is absolutely despicable. Give the example of the girl who'd been kidnapped, and she called a taxi to get her back to social services. The taxi, when it stopped, needed paying. The social services, instead of paying for the taxi, phoned back her abusers and said, please, can you come pay for this taxi? And they, of course, took her away, and she had attempted to escape. Then there was the case of the man who broke into the house where his daughter was being held, and the police arrested him and prosecuted him. There is no doubt that the police and social services and councils were on the side of the grooming gangs, and they still are. I think that what we have seen in terms of Jess Phillips, the way that she has attempted to stop a public inquiry is remarkable. Look, the attack in Nottingham was really, really bad. There is a public inquiry about how that happened. How there could be a public inquiry into that and not one into grooming is remarkable. But what did Keir Starmer say about it? Well, he said, I think it's going to be too frustrating for the victims. Basically, he said the victims don't want to tell their story. When is that ever true? Secondly, he said it would be too difficult in the witness stand for them. Thirdly, they've got drug problems, therefore they'd be disparate. Well, hang on a second. All of these are problems in court cases that the Crown Prosecution Service get over every single day. They put screens in there. They have people via video link. They take witness statements in text only. But what you have to remember is, with this public inquiry, it's not a particular cross-examination, is it? All we want to know is their stories, and we want to ask the central question: are we importing this from abroad? I will tell you, by the way, what the public inquiry will say, and I've said this in previous videos, so if I'm being repetitious, I apologise, but it's worth making the point again. The end of the public inquiry will be, look, the Conservative government under David Cameron cut back police budgets and cut social services budgets and shut Sure Starts programmes. Therefore, that was the reason why it all happened. Do you remember Grenfell Tower, when the fire inspectors said it was safe and then it flambéed? And then they said, what we need is more fire inspectors. No, you need to sack the fire inspectors who said it was safe, right? We don't need more of them, we need fewer of them. Right? I mean, at least if there'd been no fire inspectors, people might have done their own inspection before they moved in. I mean, I say that with a smile on my face, but I'm being deadly, deadly serious. We don't make the problem worse. More inspectors is just more bureaucracy for the public, and if they can't do the job, we don't want them in that position. So now on to joint enterprise, which I think is extremely important, because we're talking about how Sadiq Khan has given no specific funding for the Metropolitan Police. I want to talk, before I go through this video properly, about joint enterprise. So imagine now you were going to commit a armed robbery, as an example. Right, now we all together, I know what you're up to, we've discussed it together, and what we've now decided is I'm going to help you in the following way. I'm going to ensure that the CCTV is turned off. I'm going to ensure the police investigation is stillborn. I'm going to ensure that evidence disappears. I'm going to ensure that the police arrest the victims and bully them out of making allegations against you. What you would say then, if you were the CPS, if you were the police, you would say this is a joint venture between you and me. The fact I didn't run into the Bradford and Bingley with the shotgun doesn't mean I'm not part of the gang. Then ask yourself about Sadiq Khan, the man who denies the crime has existed at all. And also, then he says that he won't allocate any resources to the police specifically for an investigation about it. Well, I think you're getting dangerously close to a joint venture, aren't you? What about Sir Peter Fahey when he goes down to, former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, when he goes down to Rochdale and he says, I'm not willing to discuss this issue. And of course, it's because of the whole idea of diversity. What about Simon Danchuk? And I think Simon Danchuk is a really, really good example here of where this joint enterprise comes in. Simon Danchuk is the MP for Rochdale. He's the person that raised the issue of the grooming gangs, which actually was particularly brave for him because the perpetrators were in Rochdale, whereas the actual victims were in Haywood and Middleton next door. So there was nothing politically in it for him. Now, he had a breakup with his wife, and he sent some flirty text messages to a girl who was like 19. So the press ran the following: Simon Danchuk attempts to groom a teenager, as if that was the same. We talked earlier in this video about the way that we call it grooming teenage girls, but it's not, right? The fact that they used the same terminology to silence Danchuk, I think, was deeply, deeply offensive. And I get people phoning up saying, why are you allowing this person, this not person, on your channel? He wasn't that, right? All right, he shouldn't have been chatting up a 19-year-old bird, I accept that, but it wasn't the grooming of teenage girls that we're talking about with the Pakistani community. And to try and compare the two, I think, is absolutely, absolutely dastardly. So I now say, well, okay, you know, the guy who did that to Danchuk went on to be the Police and Crime Commissioner of Greater Manchester. The Chief Constable of Greater Manchester were also in on it. Why can't we prosecute them for a joint enterprise? If you look at Sadiq Khan when he says he doesn't even know what grooming is, what you could say is, You could say, well, it doesn't happen in his patch. And that would be true. There have been no prosecutions in Tooting, even though it has a large Pakistani Muslim population. But of course, there have been in Stratford from when he was Mayor of Greater London, rather than just an MP. Now, the question comes in terms of this joint enterprise. Well, hang on a second. Let's ask ourselves, is the reason why with these prosecutions are not happening in London because there are no grooming? Or is it because the Mayor of London has deliberately stopped the Metropolitan Police from running a proper investigation? Well, first of all, we do know that it took place in Stratford. Secondly, what is unique about London that's so different to Keighley, that's so different to Oxford, that's so different to Burnley, Blackburn, Rochdale? Why is it that uniquely those Pakistani Muslims that emigrate to the United Kingdom are involved in grooming in Burnley, but aren't involved if they happen to move to London? That is a puzzling question. Or could it be that the reason that there have been very few prosecutions in London because of the same reason there were very few prosecutions in Rochdale in the 80s and 90s, or no prosecutions, because the police and social services were turning a blind eye? And that makes the allegation even more serious against Sadiq, because it starts to say that he is somebody who is ensuring this crime continues for the purpose of political correctness. Something very much to think about. Now, if you're talking about Sadiq Khan defending bad people, look, I will give you the example of him defending Babar Ahmed. Sadiq has said a number of things about Babar Ahmed. He said, first of all, he was his best friend at school. Then he said he was his cousin. Then he said they went to the same school. Then he said they vaguely knew each other. Then he said they'd never met. And the reason why he said those three things is when Babar Ahmed was sent to prison at Belmarsh, Sadiq Khan went to visit him 3 times. One of which was before he was an MP. But we're not allowed to talk about that. MI5 bugged the meeting, and I got told they weren't interested in what Babar Ahmed said, they were interested in what Sadiq Khan said, because at the time there were serious questions about why he was continually defending terrorists from the Hezb ut-Tahrir group. There are former members of Hezb ut-Tahrir who claim that while Sadiq Khan was never a member, he was always considered a kindred spirit. Now, to be fair, in defence of Sadiq, these are people who have been quite badly discredited. I don't say that because in anything more than if you admit you've been in a terrorist group, I would suggest that in of itself makes you a bad character. And it may well be also that they were wrong. But Babar Ahmed, who at one point is Sadiq's best friend and then somebody he'd never met, he is later convicted and pleads guilty of being the key fundraiser for Al-Qaeda in the world, the godfather, they called him, of Al-Qaeda's online funding network. Now, I will say that I do agree with the family of Babar Ahmed that the fact he'd never been to the United States of America meant he shouldn't have been extradited to the United States of America. I think this bill that Tony Blair signed that allowed the extradition of people to the United States of America without prima facie evidence was stupid. Blair said that the Americans would have a reciprocal arrangement. There was no prospect of the Senate passing that, and Blair knew it. Anyway, so that is evidence that Sadiq will behave badly towards bad people when he sees it as politically expedient. But now I was going to say to you about a crime that I thought I wanted to talk to you about. My understanding is that this crime is valid and viable. I've taken legal advice at the Patriot Fund's expense to do it. Right. Here's what you do. You have a crime of assisting an offender when it comes to grooming gangs. That is to say that if you are somebody who, like Sadiq Khan, like Sir Peter Fahey, has sought to cover up this level of criminality, you yourself can be convicted of being a member of the gang. However, I believe that the punishment should go further. If you are a police officer, a social worker, or an elected politician, I believe the penalty for conviction of this offence should be death. And the reason I say that is very, very simple. I have often seen so let's explain this properly. The death penalty doesn't necessarily act as a deterrent because there are people like, perverts and whatever, who are just it's so ingrained within their psyche that there's nothing you can do to stop them. But actually, an extremely draconian punishment will stop some people. Imagine you were told that that burglary was punishable by death. I think the number of burglars would go down considerably. It would also be seen as grossly disproportionate. But my point is this. The people that are being involved in this covering up are doing it for political expediency. They're basically bad people, but they're not bad enough to behave in the grooming gangs themselves. And so, if you are so selfish that you will cover up the abuse of a child in order to protect your career, then you are definitely somebody who will dob somebody in if you believe you're going to lose your career and receive the death penalty as a result of ignoring it. I think that is something that we really, really need to think about. And so it would be marvellous that you could turn around and you could say, right, people like Sadiq Khan, people like Sir Peter Fahey, people like the former, I forget the name of the former Commissioner of Greater Manchester, but those people now are going to be criminally prosecuted and they are at risk of the death penalty for it. That would certainly shake things up. But I will say one final thing. The problem here actually is partly the response of the British government, partly the response of councils, partly the response of the police, but actually it's about importing an alien culture to the United Kingdom. I've always said that there are reasons why countries are poor, and the two reasons are almost always poor government and the subjugation of women. People go, oh, but what about the pillaging of places? Well, hang on a second. The country on earth that has probably been more invaded and more pillaged and suffered more genocides and had more looting than anywhere else is Poland. And it is fast becoming one of the richest countries on earth. Look, conversely, with Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, when Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, it is one of the richest countries in terms of natural resources in the world. It was called the breadbasket of Africa. Poor governance and corruption has caused multiple famines in a country that used to export food around the world. There is this great tendency in the West to believe that the reason that some countries are rich is automatic and some countries are poor is automatic, but that's not actually true. People want to tell you that the reason the United Kingdom was so successful was just the transatlantic slave trade. It had no money other than selling slaves from Africa. That's simply absolute garbage. The profits went to only a small number of people. Well, the reason why Britain is so rich is because of its unique system of government, because of its stability, because of rule of law, because of the fact in the past you could trust the police, you could trust the government to be light touch. You weren't going to be put under arbitrary house arrest as a result of COVID. You weren't going to see political prosecutions. You weren't going to see political prisoners in this country. That's the reason why it was so successful. And so I make this point to you. When we talk about equal but different, when we talk about cultural enrichment, what we're really talking about is bringing people from inferior cultures to the United Kingdom and learning from them. The police corruption, learning from Pakistan. Government corruption, learning from Pakistan. Family voting, learning from Pakistan. Knife crime or machete crime from Somalia. There's all these sorts of, and Rwanda and places like that, there's all these sorts of things that are becoming part of Britain. We need to be able to stand up and say, look, if you want to come to this country and you are worth bringing in, that's fine. But you have to understand the reason your country's a dump is because of the way it's run. If you want to run Burnley more like Lahore, frankly, it will become a dump like Lahore. If you want to run Britain in the same way as Somalia, if you come from Somalia and say, oh, I'll tell you what London needs to be a bit more like Somalia, congratulations, you're a savage. Right? It's junk. It's garbage. You know, President Xi of China, with his friend David Lammy, let's increase Chinese influence in London. Hey, let's not. Let's not do that. Let's say that the Hong Kong Chinese, who are ethnically exactly the same, but culturally entirely different, have produced far more for the world than China has. Far more. And in fact, Beijing has changed significantly since Hong Kong came in. They basically decided that every political principle they ever had was wrong. And that is how it just shows you now what people try and do is talk about race. Well, let's not talk about race. I mean, look, you have some countries, I mean, what is it? Somalia is badly run. Somaliland is phenomenally well run. They're next to each other. Ethnically, it's exactly the same people. So I think this race thing is a non-starter. But the political expediency needs to end. And also, more importantly, uncontrolled immigration from third world countries need to end. Because if you really want to deal with this problem, yes, you can have the police round these people up left, right and centre. But they shouldn't be in Britain anyway. And I want to tell you about a second law that I want to bring in. I think it's time for us to clarify our immigration system. I've always talked about Shamima's law, which is this idea that what we're going to do is we're going to have the right to defect. I believe in a multicultural society, you have to have the right to defect and leave the United Kingdom. And what you do is you exchange your passport at Heathrow Airport, formally renounce your citizenship, and then we fly you wherever you want to go to fight for whomever you want. So I think we need to do that. But I think what we also need to do is we need to say the war's over, it's time to go home. So whatever reason we're bringing people to the country, we need to ask them to leave at the end of the war. Now, if they want to apply for work permits or whatever, and similarly, when we deported German POWs after the Second World War, some of them have married local girls and stuff. Okay, fine, I accept that. But you do need to, in general, go home. I will tell you, when I was working as a Ukrainian aid worker, I only did a very tiny amount, so I don't want to be a Walter Mitty. But what would happen was the women would come across the border and they would stay in the closest possible place to their men. Now, for most of them, that was Poland and Moldova and places like that. For some, it was Slough and Gloucester, but fundamentally, it was certainly, for most of them, it was their cousins living a few miles because they want to be as close to their husbands as possible. By the way, little Moldova never had any immigration at all. 3.5 million people. It took 350,000 Ukrainians. Why did it have no immigration from places like Albania, from places like Libya, from places like Somalia? Before the war in Ukraine, it was the poorest country in Europe. So these benefit shoppers, these economic migrants pretending to be refugees didn't go. But genuine refugees during the Ukraine war, they flooded into the place because they can speak the lingo, they like the food, and it's easy, and it's very, very close to Ukraine. So that's an amazing thought about genuine refugees. But the war's over, it's time to go home. Also, every single person convicted of a crime who was born abroad, who is a dual, not even a dual citizen, anyone who's born abroad, go home. That's it. Even if you've been accused of something comparatively minor like shoplifting, you'll be returned to your country of origin. We don't want foreign criminals of any description. So those are the laws that I'm suggesting we bring in. The joint enterprise conspiracy, the Sadiq Khan law, if you like, Shamima's law, I think we need to bring in for the right to defect. And we also need to bring in that management of immigration where we can say that that we're going to start sending people back. If they're refugees from a war, when the war's over, they leave. And if they're convicted of any crime at all, then they really, really need to go. It's not our job to rehabilitate shoplifters from abroad. If you are worthwhile at here, that's good. And all of this right to family life, well, you know what? You've got WhatsApp. I think it's absolute garbage. Thanks so much for watching this. The link is in the description to support the Patriot Group, the Patriot Fund rather, which have funded the research into the legal advice I've taken. Also want to explain about the Patriot Fund, what we've done. We've been supporting the Women's Safety Initiative. Absolutely fantastic campaign. Sorry, I'm going to have to repeat that because the camera ran out of batteries. I will get the update out about the Patriot Fund, and I want to thank you all, and the link is in the description to the Patriot Fund. Until next time, arrivederci and goodbye.